Good evening. Once again, it's good to see everyone here tonight. Hopefully you've had a good day. It was a beautiful day up until a little while ago when the clouds started coming out. But a little earlier, a little warmer, sun shining of God's beauty and His creation. And like I said this morning, it's always a great day when we can come together to worship the Lord in the way that He has commanded us to do. To be with brothers and sisters of Christ. And any visitors that we have with us tonight or who's watching online tonight, I want you to know that, again, you are always our honored guest. And invite you to come back or to join us as soon as you can. What if I told you that I changed my mind in regards to what lesson I'm doing tonight? I haven't. As I said this morning, my lesson tonight is one that until about 24 hours ago I had not anticipated on doing. But one that comes because of something that I kind of read ahead with our Wednesday night study, and something came up. So if you have your Wednesday night book, turn to page 17. I want to read just a little bit of a clip of this that kind of sets up why I chose this lesson for tonight. At the very bottom of page 17, now, again, for those who have not been joining us on Wednesday nights, we're doing a book about the 21st century Christian. Looking at how to live in today's world as a Christian, looking at modern day issues. And really the first part of this book is looking at the idea of the secular world versus the Christian world. And coming up, Lord willing, Wednesday night, we're looking at some different viewpoints and looking at some cultural issues. At the bottom of page 17, bottom left-hand corner, it says, for your preschool children, you may find children's books on such topics as dinosaurs. Many of our children can use the long names given to the dinosaurs. Their books might tell them that these extinct creatures lived 245 to 66 million years ago. The television might reinforce the secular worldview with programs about dinosaurs like The Land Before Time, Dinosaur Train, and Jurassic World Camp. These are not innocent little books that entertain like fairy tales. For example, The Three Little Pigs, Cinderella, and so forth. These books and TV shows, which are written at the preschool level, indoctrinate children by undermining the biblical account of creation and the chronology found in Genesis. These preschool and primary books lay the groundwork for teaching evolution. All through one's public school, the child will be taught the doctrine of evolution. Indeed, teaching creation is banned in the classrooms at all levels. And I'll address those other last 2 points, so at least not more willing. But if you have read this in the way that I did, I had Heather read this yesterday just to make sure that I didn't kind of misunderstand it. Kind of makes it sound like the idea of dinosaurs is something that's unbiblical. And now certainly the timeline issue is something we're going to dive deep into tonight. But in regards to the overall question about dinosaurs, are dinosaurs unbiblical? Does it go against the doctrine of Christianity? And that got me to thinking about this whole idea. And again, the first time I read that, I kind of glanced at it and said, I'm going to read it again because I think I read that wrong. And sure enough, to me, it sounds like he's pretty much disputing the idea of dinosaurs. And again, there are some things he talked about here that are definitely against biblical doctrine, but that began my little research. And like I said this morning, for the last few days, I've been going back and forth with some friends of mine, or at least looking at their information. And a lot of what I got tonight is based off of the help that they gave me. Again, Stuart Wilson sent me several things that he has used in his lessons in the past. There was a lesson I got from Al Burns that he had done several years ago on this topic, and I've got some resources from both of those. Matter of fact, it was interesting. I went back and listened to Al's lesson yesterday, which I think was from 2017. And as he began that lesson, he talked about, I believe it was the same week that Lawson actually got married, because he mentioned that at the beginning of his lesson. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. But we're going to be looking tonight at the biblical example of the idea of dinosaurs. This is a topic that is very interesting, and again, based off the response I had this morning, over the last few hours, it sounds like several people were pretty anxious about hearing this lesson. Curtis told me this morning, he said, I got to find a way to get mom and dad here now because I want to hear this lesson. All right, so this is a topic that even going back to children, this is just a very interesting thing. I remember being a kid growing up and being fascinated about dinosaurs. I remember when Jurassic Park came out. I was like 12, 13 years old. And I remember watching it for the first time thinking, man, that may be what dinosaurs really look like. Kind of putting it on the screen. I watched The Land Before Time as a kid. And even yesterday, we were headed to a birthday party in Bolton. And before I told anybody I was doing this lesson, Jack was saying, where's my dinosaur? It's a little plastic dinosaur playing with. So again, this is a very fascinating topic. The question is, how does this fit in line with the Bible? How does this fit in line with the ideas of creation? And that's the question that we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at dinosaurs, whether or not they're a scientific myth or whether these could be biblical creatures. Now, I'll say right now, as we get to the end of the lesson, there are going to be very few concrete things that I would say yes or no on. Rather, this lesson is designed to expand our minds. And I think you guys know by now that I do a lot of this kind of stuff. And that's because I think as a Christian, we have to open our minds and our hearts and kind of think outside the box sometimes, because as a Christian in today's world, we have to answer a lot of questions. And we have to answer a lot of things that if we don't think outside the box, then we may not be ready to answer those questions. And this is certainly one of those things. And I'll be honest, I really didn't know this until a few days ago when I started doing more research. And the fact that there are a lot of Christians who really dispel the idea of dinosaurs. And so looking at what does the Bible say about this topic, and again, looking at a lot of what ifs, and again, looking at what the Bible tells us in regards to this. Now, we're going to start off by looking at science. And we talked about science a good bit this past Wednesday night, kind of setting up what we're going to talk into this coming Wednesday night. What does science say about the idea of dinosaurs? There's a whole lot about dinosaurs out there. What does science say about it? Here's a screenshot that I asked Google a little earlier. And what Google AI does is that it takes all these websites and it looks for keywords and phrases based off the questions and gives kind of a estimated summary about all these different websites. So I asked Google, what does science say about dinosaurs? The answer here, it says that it studies ancient life through fossils, bones, eggs, stripes of skin, and geological evidence, revealing dinosaurs were diverse, active, and varied in size, living for millions of years before most died out 66 million years ago. But birds are their direct descendants, meaning dinosaurs are still alive today. Scientists use advanced techniques like 3D scanning to understand their anatomy, movement, diets, social behaviors, and even color, challenging old ideas of slow, cold-blooded reptiles. So science says that dinosaurs are these creatures that we kind of think about that lived many, many years ago. All right? That say they lived millions of years ago. And again, we're going to touch on the timeline here as we go through the lesson. But one thing that I found was that 66 million years kind of comes up again. Matter of fact, I just read it here, and he put it here in the book as well. 66 million years ago was the idea that maybe dinosaurs died out. That's the scientific viewpoint. And that these were prehistoric animals that lived for a long time. They've been gone for a whole lot of years. And this is what the study's about. So that's what science says. You know, science is concrete, right? Science is there to prove certain things. I'm going to give with the question here, what is science? And throughout my adult life, I really thought about this question, and I've kind of dived, not too deep into certain things about science, but there are some things going back to my college days, and even as an adult, that when it comes to science, there are some very interesting things about science. Because science is based around the idea of questioning and of proving and of doing experiments. And when you think about the four core subjects, English and literature is based around writing and reading and summarizing. And math is learning critical thinking skills and how to add and subtract. History is about looking at the details, looking at written documents and trying to piece together what happened. Science is about questioning things. It's about using equations to try to figure out all these things about life. And so I asked the question again, what is science? Well, it told me that in summary, science is a reliable tool for understanding the world, but it is not infallible. It thrives on challenging existing knowledge, making it a self-improving rather than perfectly correct system. The question I asked here, is science always correct? That is my question. We always hear the phrase today, trust the science, right? Trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. Been hearing that for a few years now, right? Well, my question was, is science always correct? And again, the answer that Google gave me based off these different researches was no. Science is not always correct. It says that it is a self-improving system, which means that science is constantly changing. I said this Wednesday night, but I had a professor in college, and he was my mentor in college. He was a great teacher. But that first semester is a roller coaster because I couldn't tell if this guy went to church or if he was an atheist or what. He was always up and down. And all semester long, we had to read these articles that was based around certain things about science. And he kept saying over and over, science proves itself wrong all the time. And for weeks, science proves itself wrong. And towards the end of the semester, he said, science has proven that people are born gay. And I was like, but I thought that science proves itself wrong all the time, right? So science does prove itself because science is ever evolving. Okay? So I bring up that question that as we look at this idea of dinosaurs in the timeline and the facts that science gives us, are those facts correct? I ask this question here. Is it global warming or is it climate change? I remember back in the 90s and early 2000s hearing a whole lot about global warming, the ozone layer, and that we're all going to burn up one day. And then all of a sudden, about 15, 16 years ago, the weather started cooling down a little bit. And all of a sudden, it turned into climate change. And that the climate fluctuates back and forth. All right? There's even, I read an article a couple weeks ago about a congresswoman who said, if we don't do something soon, this world is going to be ended in 10 years. Guess what we're getting close to? That 10-year mark. All right? So, again, science is ever changing, but is it always correct? Why are there large discrepancies in regards to the dating of dinosaurs? Now, one of the things I did discover throughout my research is that there are a lot of different dates thrown around. And there's not really a common date that all scientists believe in regards to when dinosaurs were here. Some say, it says, mainstream scientists and evolutionary biologists do not believe that humans and non-avian dinosaurs coexisted. This comes the idea of whether dinosaurs lived on their own or whether humans lived here. And again, this is where I begin to get a lot of different answers. Because my first few sources, I asked the same question, did dinosaurs and humans live together? And there were several that said that yes, many scientists believe that. And then like for 4 straight searches, it kept saying no. That many scientists, and this goes back to the idea of evolution. Evolutionary biologists do not believe that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. Scientific evidence shows that dinosaurs went extinct approximately 66 million years ago, while modern humans evolved only about 300,000 years ago. So again, you got a lot of different dates going on here. The question for me was, okay, what are you sticking with? When were dinosaurs created? When were they? The only number that kind of stays true is that 66 million years as to when they became extinct. And again, we'll get to that later on. But there's a lot of anomalies here to where they can't really seem to figure out what is what. What is the year? Did they live with humans? Did they not live with humans? And again, depending on what source you're looking at, the answer may be yes, it may be no. So what's the problem of science here? Well, it seems like science can't really get their stuff together in regards to these questions. All right? And my question, being a historian, is always, what about the evidence? Where are the written records? I said it before, one of the things that I did not like about teaching ancient history, which I did for years, was that you got all these civilizations where there's nothing but guesses as to how they lived their life. The books say they did this, they did this, and and they lived from this time frame to this time frame, but there are no written records, there's no documentation. So I got to a point where I told my kids, look guys, we think. We don't know because there's no written records. So going back this far in time, how do they know? How do they know for sure whether or not these things existed from this point to this point? If you were to ask, how old is the Earth? Again, Google's going to tell you about 4.6 billion years. And again, they take that data from all these different websites. How do they get that number? You look at carbon dating and other things, you think, how do they get these numbers? Again, it comes from looking at different testing, but again, it looks at the anomalies that comes around science. Science is not always accurate. As a matter of fact, when it comes to things like this, science a lot of times proves itself wrong over and over. Again, it is evolving, which means that as they figure out new data, new things, it means that they begin to change. So my question here is, are these facts or are these theories? And that's my question. The science in regards to dinosaurs, is it fact or are they just theories? Well, throughout my research, there is some scientific evidence that kind of leads us to maybe the existence of dinosaurs. And there were some articles that were shared with me that I thought were pretty credible. And that picture right there is from a tomb that is in the northern part of England. I'm going to put my thing's messed up. It's a gold inlaid on the tomb of Richard Bell. Richard Bell was a Catholic Church official that lived in northern England at the end of the 15th century, the late 1400s. And when he died, they buried him there in the temple. And over his grave is this gold inlay. It has his kind of picture on it. And then around it is this gold inlay around it that has something in Latin, but it has all these different animals that are carved into it, much like what you might see in the picture here. Most of those pictures are animals that we would probably recognize today. As a matter of fact, there are 3 species of dogs on that picture. But this picture right here is on that inlet. And let me back up just a little bit here, just see the full thing. If you were just to look at that picture, what's that picture look like? What kind of animal is that? Doesn't look like any animal that I can think of that exists today. As a matter of fact, if you go to the temple today and ask people to work there, they're going to give you a few different answers. First time I saw it, I thought that was kind of like a brontosaurus. Kind of looks like a dinosaur, doesn't it? All right. The question is, what is it? And nobody can really explain what it is. Matter of fact, yes, at one point in time, one of the workers was interviewed, and she said, well, it's some kind of crocodile or alligator. What's fascinating is that there is apparently a picture of a crocodile or alligator in here, and it looks nothing like this. So the question is, what is this? And if this was put in here in the late 1400s, where did they get it from? Now, I'll say this. I have no doubt whatsoever that dinosaurs did not exist in 1493, because I teach modern history, and there's no mention of dinosaurs anywhere in that part of history. So the question then comes, where did this design come from? As we skip ahead, this picture right here is of what's called an Ica stone, okay? These are ancient stones from Native American empires from modern-day Peru. And I would imagine this is probably from the Incan Empire, if I had to guess. I don't know for sure. But the Incas died out in the 1500s. And as the Spanish explorers came in, like Columbus and Pizarro, then the Incas, like many other native empires, they were killed off and destroyed. And so this is an ancient artifact. And if you notice on this stone, you have a human which appears to be riding some kind of animal. What does that animal look like? Does it look like anything that we have in modern day society? Now, it might look like a rhinoceros, but you got the spikes in the back, you got the horns up here. Kind of looks like a triceratops. Again, I don't know for sure, but again, the question is, where did they get this? And again, I don't know how far back this dates. I don't know if it's early 1500s. I don't know if it's 1200s. But again, the question is, where did they get this from? Where did they get the design for this kind of animal? As we continue, I've got 2 more examples to show you, then we're going to move on. The 2 pictures at the top, this is of a temple that is in modern-day Cambodia. And in the 11th and 12th century, I believe these were Buddhist temples. If you look at the picture in the top left-hand corner, there's an arrow pointing to the one on the left, and on the column has all these inscriptions of all these animals on it. And in one of those inscriptions has that right there. Now, again, I don't know how well you can see that, but that appears to be some kind of animal that's on 4 legs, and it's got spikes on its back. Again, what kind of animal is it? What does that resemble? If you were to see that in a book or a picture book, what will be the first thing that comes to your mind? And then the picture at the bottom left is of here in the United States. At Natural Bridge Park in Utah, all right, there have been some Christians over the years that have found this in what's called a petroglyph, which is going back to Native American civilizations of hundreds of years ago. And again, what does that look like? Now, I will say that science and the world tries to dispute these different things as being any kind of evidence of dinosaurs. And you say, well, if science supports the idea of dinosaurs, why would they dispute these? Well, because these 2 right here, if that's indeed what they are, tells us that dinosaurs and humans would have had to live at the same time. And again, evolutionists don't believe that. People who believe in evolution, they believe that dinosaurs died out a long time before human beings. And so the dispute here is that, again, going back against the idea that humans, basically we can't be wrong because that would really drastically change evolution. Again, what are these animals? I'm not going to say for sure, but you can look at it yourself. You can make your own guess. Again, the question always comes to my mind is, where did these come from? Did the dinosaurs exist at this point in time? Did they draw these based on some kind of tall legend? The point here is looking at, we have evidence that maybe these creatures exist at some point in time. We have other archaeological evidence of bones and skeletons and other things. So the question of, did dinosaurs really exist, there's a physical evidence here to heavily suggest that yes, they did. The question here is when. But I think that we have a lot of hardcore evidence here to suggest that, yeah, dinosaurs really existed. And again, that's my opinion, but I think that's what we see here. The question then comes in mind of when. When did they exist? Let's look what the Bible says about this. Now, as far as dinosaurs being in the Bible, you're not going to see the word dinosaur anywhere, at least not that I can find. So the question is if dinosaurs really did exist, how does that fit into the Bible? How does that fit into Christianity? How does that fit into the history that we read about in the Old and New Testament? And the two examples that I keep seeing over and over was in the book of Job. In Job chapter 40, what's happening here is that we talked a lot about Job in the past, in that Job 1, Job chapter 2, Job has his family ripped away from him, livestock, everything taken away, even his health. But at this point, by the time we get to chapter 40, Job is questioning God. Job is questioning God. And so God is responding to that question. And God says here in chapter 40, verse 15, says, "Behold the behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold his strength in his waist, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He hangs his tail like a cedar. His tendons of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tube of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron." Now, I have no idea what modern animal this would be referring to. I don't know what ancient animal this is referring to. But God is describing this behemoth as something that is really big. As a matter of fact, if we just use the word behemoth in modern day English, we're probably talking about something that's pretty large. Okay, so this is some kind of a large animal that, again, God is basically telling Job, hey, you want to know how powerful I am? I'm about to tell you. He created this behemoth, this large animal. It says that he hangs his tail like a cedar, like a tree. I've heard some people refer to this as maybe being something kind of like a brontosaurus. Again, I don't know. It doesn't say it. But this is some kind of large animal. As we skip ahead just a little bit further, into chapter 41, God gives another example. He says, "Can you drag out Leviathan with a fish hook and press down his tongue with a rope? Can you put a rope in his nose and pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Or will he speak to you gentle words?" God is describing another one of his creatures. Now, the behemoth appears to be some kind of land animal, whereas the Leviathan is some kind of sea creature. Again, why is this sea creature important? Well, God's questions here are rhetorical. It says, can you drag it out with a fish hook? Can you use a rope? Can you rope his nose and pierce his jaw with a hook? The answer to that is no. This is a mighty beast. And in verse 8, he says, "Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be hurled down even at the sight of him? No one is so reckless that he dares disturb him. Who then is he who opposes me?" That's the question. Who then is he who opposes me? That's what Job is doing. Job is questioning God, and God's saying, look what I have created. Look at the behemoth and the Leviathan. Look at these massive creatures. The Leviathan is looking at an animal that is so fierce. He says, lay your hand on him, remember it, you will not do it again. This is a creature that you don't want to mess with. You tangle with it, you're going to be sorry. Now again, what are these two creatures? Well, we really don't know. And I've heard a lot of people suggest that maybe these are dinosaurs or other things. Again, I'm not going to say that with any kind of concrete proof because we're not told, but these are two very powerful creatures. Think to the idea of a dinosaur. Again, as growing up, how are dinosaurs described to you? These big, massive creatures. These big, strong creatures. Human beings don't want to mess with them, right? Especially the T-Rex. Now again, I'm not suggesting that's what these are, but God has created something that is so big, so powerful, he says, you don't want to mess with these things. This is the power of me. I created these things. I created these massive beasts, basically saying, you better check yourself. So we know that God has created creatures in the past that have had, that have been very tall, very strong, very massive. Again, behemoth. God has created these kind of creatures before because we have evidence of that in the Bible. Now, again, what exactly are these? We don't know. But we can look at these as some kind of large, powerful creature. Okay? Next, let's look at the timeline. So we look at the idea that, and again, as far as biblical evidence, you really kind of look here and there, and then kind of make your own decision based off of that. I'm not going to sit here and say that these were dinosaurs. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, this is our proof that dinosaurs existed. What I'm saying here is that God has that kind of power. And that if he wanted to, he could have created it. And if they were here, then God created it. Okay? So again, if they were here, they had to come from the hand of God. So with that being said, let's look at the timeline here. Because this to me is the biggest thing that we see a difference in. Now, Mark asked me this morning, are you going to talk about prehistory? All right, prehistory. When I taught that 8th grade class, chapter 1, I kind of skipped over a little bit because I talked about evolution. And so I said, here's what this group believes, here's what this group believes. You look at the facts, you make up your own mind. That's what I had to do. But it talks about prehistory. What is prehistory? Well, it's the period of time before written records. And I used to joke around my kids, that's not prehistory. Because pre means before. Okay, there is never a time before history unless you're looking at the time before God made the earth. Okay, so there is no actual prehistory in the world. You're looking at a time period before we had some kind of written documentations. And again, my problem with this time period in history is looking at what kind of evidence do we have. So again, I asked a question here. Did mankind live in prehistoric times? Did mankind live in the same time period as dinosaurs? Again, I kept telling you, got different answers. No, 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 no. All of a sudden it says yes. Yes, mankind lived in prehistoric times with anatomically modern Homo sapiens emerging roughly 300,000 years ago. The vast pre-Literate era, which lasted until roughly about 3500 BC, was defined as a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle, the use of stone tools, and the mastery of fire. I thought that date there was pretty interesting. 3500 BC. I'll come back to that here in a minute. So you're looking at, this is the time that, yes, we believe humans lived at this point in time, back before written records, all that kind of stuff. And it even breaks it down into these time periods here. The Old Stone Age, the Paleolithic era. It says roughly 2.5 million years ago. If humans supposedly lived 2.5 million years ago, and dinosaurs supposedly were killed off at 66 BC, does that not put them in the same time frame? Let's take that theory and blow it out of the water. Again, they can't really seem to come up to an agreement as to when humans and dinosaurs lived, as to when they coexisted. And since they can't come up with that, then again, you're looking at a credibility issue. Outside of the Bible evidence here, if I'm just a human being, I'm saying, well, you guys can't get this together. Which one is it? Is it yes or is it no? Let's see what the Bible says about it. Because you know what? That 3,500 year is very interesting. Because according to the Bible is fascinating. It is genius. And of course it is because it comes from God, right? Is there a time before written records? Not really. Because the Bible is our written record, it goes all the way back to the very beginning. Now, it may have been written a little bit after creation, but it goes all the way back to the very beginning. If we go back to the very beginning, then we see what God created. Genesis chapter 1, verse 24. Then God said, let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock and crawling things, and animals of the earth according to their kind. And so it was. God made the animals of the earth according to their kind, and the livestock according to their kind, and everything that crawls on the ground according to his kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created him. As we look at days 5 and 6 of the creation, we look at God making the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, the beasts of the ground, and mankind. We see it happening at the same time. Now, as far as the timeline here between day 1 and 2, I want to point out here that with each day of creation, it says there was evening, there was morning, it was one day. I believe this is one actual day. So is there a time period here to where if God created dinosaurs, could they have lived before mankind? The answer to that is no. Unless it was maybe the beasts of the sea that were created one day before man. But they would have had to live together at the same time. So again, if these dinosaurs existed, it means that God created them. Created them when? Created them here. And it says that over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth, these had to be creatures that were created by God. Not millions of years ago, but thousands. See, the Bible gives us a specific timeline. We could trace the beginning of time back to modern times by using the genealogy that's given to us. You're looking at Old Testament being somewhere, I believe, around 4,000 years, and of course, from the time of Jesus to today is about 2,000 years. So you're looking at several thousand years that this world has only been around according to the Bible. That's a far cry from millions or billions. Which one's right? Well, again, I always look at the evidence. And since we have our written documentation, again, the Bible never contradicts itself. The Bible does nothing but to confirm everything that we ever look at. The Bible confirms scientific things and feats. And this is only a small portion of what I've heard in my life in regards to what the Bible proves. There are things like inoculation and other things that we see in the Bible that, again, are years upon what modern mankind comes up with. The Bible is foolproof. It never lies. So if dinosaurs did exist, it meant that God had to create them. When did he create them? Well, about the same time he created mankind. All right, so then it becomes a question, well, when did the dinosaurs, why are they not here anymore? That becomes the next big question. Well, if we can agree that they were here, when did they die out? Again, scientists say 66 million years ago. That number keeps coming up over and over. Matter of fact, they often use in this book here, 66 million years. What happened 66 million years ago? Well, they said that a big meteorite came, crashed down in modern-day Mexico, and completely changed the environment. And that led to the death of the dinosaurs. Again, I look at that as in what makes a whole lot more sense to me is what we see in the Bible. Now, for Christians, if we can agree that there are dinosaurs, again, when were they killed off? The world is not millions of years old. That contradicts everything about it. So this is the question that I kept saying over and over was, did the flood kill the dinosaurs? We talked about this morning out of lobby. I look at Genesis chapter 6, verse 19. It says that God has chosen Noah to save mankind. God's going to flood the earth. Mankind is wicked. Mankind is corrupt and evil. And he is going to use Noah to save him and his family and then anything that God won't spare. And it says that every living thing of all flesh you shall bring two of every kind into the ark and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kind, and of the animals according to their kind, of every crawling thing of the ground according to its kind, two of every kind will come to you and keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of every food that is edible, and gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and them. So Noah did these things according to everything that God commanded him. What did God command him? Take two of every creature and put them on the ark. So can we say, well, it's got to be the flood, then the dinosaurs were killed off in the flood? Well, that's not really what we're told here. What's the answer? I'll be honest, I don't know. But if what we read here is correct, and that God told Noah to take two of everything alive and put it on the ark, and Noah did it, this can't quite be the timeline that we're looking at. So when looking at this topic, the Bible may give us some guidance as maybe where to go with this. It may not give us a whole lot of concrete answers in regards to where this is the definite date, this is definitely what happened. But again, it gives us guidance to where we can make more educated guesses. As we begin to close this out, I had a couple of questions, and again, as I was going through this, there were a couple of things that kept coming in my mind. In that, looking at the idea of dinosaurs, that's just ridiculous. You're looking at creatures that are completely different than what we have today. They're extinct. Well, again, being a history teacher, there are a lot of animals that have been extinct for years that not a whole lot of people question. One of those being the woolly mammoth. If you take a look at early American history, then most scientists believe that the first human came to the Americas during the Ice Age by crossing over the Beringia land bridge in between Russia and modern-day Alaska, and that they hunted animals like the woolly mammoth. Now, again, I always tell my kids here, we have no idea when or how we can guess because nothing tells us. But again, the idea of the woolly mammoth or the dodo bird or the passenger pigeon or these up here, These are animals that, again, mankind looks at as in, well, yeah, those things probably existed. They've been extinct for a very long time. So why is it so infallible to think the same thing about dinosaurs? Again, we have some historical proof. We have some archaeological evidence. And again, the Bible talks about these large creatures. We don't know if that's what it's talking about or not. But again, there is some biblical proof there that at one point in time, there were creatures that God created that are these big, massive creatures that could have gone in the same category as this. So my question is it possible that God would have created these beings? And why are we so, I say why is society so quick to dismiss certain things when they accept others? Say, well, those things don't exist today. So again, looking at, things we could on for many, many years. The blue whale is one that really caught my attention as I did my research. The blue whale is, in modern times, the largest animal in the world. It can get up to 100 feet long, weighs many, many tons. There is, especially a blue whale against an elephant, which is, of course, a massive creature, and then a human being right here. You don't want to come in the cross line of a blue whale. It is a massive behemoth creature. Okay? Research also says that it is considered to be the largest animal of all time. Several sources told me that the blue whale is the largest animal of all time, or at least is believed to be. So if we have an animal that still exists today that is this large, and is considered to be the largest of all time, then it's really not that infallible to think about, again, these other creatures that we have some evidence of that are much, much smaller. That, again, maybe the Bible can even help along the way in regards to God could have created creatures that big. Again, God said the Leviathan, you don't want no part of that. The behemoth, it's massive. You don't want to mess with it. God has created creatures that is this large. He created the blue whale. Again, these things are here because God created them. And so if we dispute those, then we're disputing the power of God. That was the point of Job. Job was starting to doubt God. And God said, oh, really? Think about this and think about this. I created those. You can't handle them, but I can. God has created these creatures before. So, I got 4 main points here in regards to where we're going to wrap up. Number 1, in that there were large creatures mentioned in the Bible. Now, again, can we say that these are dinosaurs? I'm not going to take that step. I've known others to say that, to say, see, these are dinosaurs. I'm not going to say that. What I am saying is that God has known to obviously create very large creatures. And again, we have some of these that no longer exist today that were mentioned in the Old Testament. There are mentions of dragons in several places of the Old Testament. Of course, they're mentioned in the book of Revelation as well in regards to referencing Satan. But again, you're looking at these large creatures that really are not far off from what we consider to be dinosaurs. So if we're looking at Christians saying, well, dinosaurs couldn't have existed, could they? Does the Bible give us a glimpse as to these things could have existed? And if they did, they obviously came from God himself, right? So number 2, these powerful creatures certainly could have existed based off the descriptions that we read. And again, looking at the power of God, don't forget that. The power of God, God created everything. So who are we to doubt what God could and could not have created? Again, we compare dinosaurs with modern day large animals. These are not creatures that, are 60 stories tall. These are not like Godzilla. Okay, these creatures were about the same size. Most of these are about the same size as many that we see today. Think about the giraffe. The large neck of the giraffe. Think about the massive creatures today, elephants. Again, the blue whale. Those creatures still exist today. Can we really discount that these creatures over here could have lived at some point in time? I thought this is very interesting. If you go back and look at Al's lessons, he said, there are creatures today that are just fascinating. Think about the lightning bug. I know that in the summertime, Hannah likes to take the kids out and look at lightning bugs. We have bugs that actually have lights on them. We have eels that, again, God has created that is powerful enough to electrocute other animals without even harming itself. There's something called the bombardier beetle that I never heard of before. But apparently can spray out a venomous poison that is so hot It destroys anything it comes in contact with. Now, those things are about that big. But think about how powerful they are. That's the power of God. And when it comes down to it, that's my main point. As a Christian, can I really question the power of God? Again, we have evidence of some of these things probably existing. Again, we looked at that earlier. So who am I to question the power of God? In that, no, these could not have existed because these creatures are too large. God can create anything. Number 3, the biblical timeline says that dinosaurs and humans had to coexist. If dinosaurs are real, again, this evolutionary theory that you had dinosaurs and they died, and then you had human beings, that's blown out of the water. Because if you look at the Bible, again, you go back to Genesis 1, there is no time frame in the Bible except for the first few days to where there are no human beings. So they had to live at the same time. Again, not millions of years ago, not 33 million, 4 billion years ago, but several thousand years ago. If we look at the genealogy and the timeline, the earth is only a few thousand years old. I used to kind of joke around with my kids, when we read these things, these people lived, 5.6 billion years ago or 4.3 billion years ago. I always said, how did they come up with that number? You got carbon dating and other things, but there's a lot of flaws with those dating techniques. My last couple of years of teaching ancient history, I did a lot of research on that, and there's a lot of flaws with carbon dating. And again, there's a lot of flaws with these timelines, and that they contradict each other a lot. Science proves itself wrong over and over. The Bible never does. Matter of fact, the Bible only concludes what is real. In that God created all in the beginning. And whether they're here today or not, we cannot dispute the power of God. And finally here, that the typical dinosaur probably died out sometime throughout history. Is there one specific event where it killed them all out? We don't see anywhere like that in the Bible. Because again, that means that you would have been absent of human beings, which we, again, have no proof of whatsoever. So more than likely what happened here is the same that happened to all these other extinct animals, like the woolly mammoth, in that they were hunted and they were killed until there were none left. In the 1800s, as the United States expanded west, what was called manifest destiny, they scattered into the Great Plains, modern-day Kansas and Colorado and Wyoming, Idaho. And at the beginning of the 1800s, there were thousands upon thousands of herd of buffalo in the Great Plains. By the time we got to the year 1900, there was one single herd of buffalo left. Why? Because of human beings. Because they hunted buffalo for meat and for tools. They were essential to the Plains Indians, but as the Americans began to migrate, they began to hunt these things for trophies and other things. And all of a sudden, they're almost killed off in 100 years. And the only reason that they're still around today is because the federal government put them in Yellowstone National Park to protect them. So, what happened to the dinosaurs? Probably the very same thing. Again, we look and say, what does the Bible say about these topics? Was there an ice age? Was there this? Was there that? And again, we're given very little evidence of those things. And so as a result, again, we have to look at what probably happened. And what we see here is that science and the Bible just don't mix. I know that's a shocker. But when it comes to this topic, that's what we see. Now, again, like I said earlier, there are as we get to the end tonight, there are very few things where I'm going to say yes and no on. Okay? I believe that they existed because we see a lot of evidence of it. And I believe that they existed because God has that kind of power. We have creatures that are described kind of that size of power in the Bible. So who am I to question God's power? Now, all the other things, again, I don't know. I don't know if the Leviathan is an actual dinosaur or a behemoth. I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to say that I do. But we can see examples of those kind of beings at some point in time that God created. He could have created these others. The lesson tonight is really more along the lines of opening our minds. As a Christian, I think that's really important. That's why I chose this book to go over on Wednesday nights. In that we have to open our minds. We have to look at this from points of view. Because these are the questions that as Christians, we're going to get answered at some point in time. And tonight, hopefully, you're a little bit more prepared to answer those questions. Again, not necessarily a whole lot of concretes here. I wasn't going to have a whole lot of concretes. but looking at the Bible and saying the Bible can help to suggest this and can help to back this up where science leaves off. The world says this, the Bible says this. And because of that, these are the things that we look at. Again, my point tonight was not to prove yes or no that dinosaurs existed, but rather to look at what the Bible says and then make a decision based off of it. To look at, as a Christian, how do we answer those questions? Because again, we're going to get those questions. So tonight, hopefully you're a little bit more prepared. Hopefully this makes sense. And if I got something wrong, always bring it up to me. But like I said, nothing here tonight is concrete. All right? These are just different perspectives and using the Bible to look at these viewpoints. What's real, what's not? Again, we just trust what the Bible tells us and that's it. But I do know that God has that kind of power. And I know that there are things that I don't understand today that maybe I will one day. But those are things that God doesn't really want us to know right now. And again, that comes down to our faith. So as we conclude the lesson tonight, what does it have to do with salvation? Well, it has a lot to do with faith. It has a lot to do with reading and understanding the Bible. It has a lot to do with how to live as a Christian in today's world, to face these questions, and they come up with a biblical response to those questions. For me, it reaffirms my faith in God. And that's exactly what this has done for me. Again, it reminds me of the power of God. It reminds me of what God is capable of what God created, everything around us, everything that ever has been and will be. And I'm not going to dispute that. I know that God's power is also strong enough to either send me to hell for eternity or to let me into heaven, as probably this morning. And that's what I want to leave you with tonight. Okay, regardless of what this question is, what is your faith in God and what does it look like? What's your faith in the Bible? Do we use the Bible in these situations? What can the Bible help us with in regards to answering these questions? And again, that comes down to our understanding and our faith. Tonight, if we can help anybody who needs to come forward, maybe somebody who needs to become a Christian, or maybe somebody who needs to come forward to get forgiveness of sins, or maybe to need prayers to help to get through a certain situation. Again, look at the power of God. The power of God says if we come forward, we ask, He will give. If we come with a sincere heart, no matter what we've done, God will forgive. And that's what I'm going to leave with tonight. And then this morning we'll talk about being prepared, being ready. That's the power of God. God can take away, He can give. He can send us to hell, or He can bring us into heaven. So tonight, where do you stand with God? If we can help in any way, please come as we stand and as we sing.